Toxic fandom has been a problem for as long as big tentpole franchises like Star Wars or Star Trek or shared superhero universes have existed, but it's been an especially visible problem since the advent of social media. This is from an article published by Variety, headline, Toxic Fandom, How Hollywood is Battling Fans Who Are Just Out for Blood, From Social Media Boot Camps to Superfan Focus Groups by Adam B. Vary. This is from about midway through the article, quote, Toxic fandoms have grown so pernicious that they've become a fact of life for many, and so powerful that while talent, executives, and publicists will privately bemoan the issue, fear of inadvertently triggering another backlash kept several studios from speaking for this story, even on background. As one rep put it, it's just a lose-lose. Those who did talk with Variety all agreed that the best defense is to avoid provoking fandoms in the first place. In addition to standard focus group testing, studios will assemble a specialized cluster of superfans to assess possible marketing materials for a major franchise project. They're very vocal, says the studio exec. They will just tell us if you do that, fans are going to retaliate. These groups have even led studios to alter the projects. If it's early enough and the movie isn't finished yet, we can make those kinds of changes. If you read the entire Variety article, it sounds like most of these efforts to appease or at least avoid provoking the toxic reactionary fans are aimed at the marketing strategies of movies and TV shows. It's not so much about adjusting the creative as it is about adjusting the ways in which it is presenting these projects to the world to avoid pissing off the toxic superfans. Although there is that detail in that passage that I just read to you about how sometimes the feedback from these superfan focus groups has been used to influence alterations to the project. If it's early enough in the process, we can make those changes, the studio representative quoted says. And there's a certain level at which that's nothing new. Hollywood has been using focus groups for probably as long as there's been a Hollywood. I mean, for longer than I've been alive. For decades and decades and decades, Hollywood has convened focus groups, not for every single movie, but for certain circumstances, for certain movies. And they have made adjustments, not just to the marketing of a movie, but to the content of a movie based on the feedback they receive from focus groups. I have never been a fan of this process. I don't like focus groups or the use of focus groups, but it's nothing new. The thing is, and the difference between those kinds of focus groups and the superfan focus groups that are being referenced in this article is traditional focus groups are about making sure that a movie is going to be received by a general audience, or making sure that if there's doubt about a particular part of the movie, if somebody's not sure about the ending, or somebody's not sure about a big moment in the movie, does this come across? Are people understanding what we need them to understand? Because, at this moment, are they grasping what we need them to grasp? Is it playing for the audience? We need to have a focus group to test that. Or to make sure that the movie is reaching the particular demographics that it's being targeted towards. If it's not just being pitched at a general audience, if you want to make sure that it's a movie that will appeal to people within a certain age group, or people within a certain ethnic group, or people from a certain profession, or whatever. Like, there are particular demographics that are targeted by focus groups, but those demographics in and of themselves are still fairly broad. With these superfan focus groups, it sounds like it's not so much about making sure that a film or a TV show, whatever kind of project, will appeal to a given demographic or will appeal to a general audience. It's more about making sure that it doesn't piss off a very specific subset of the audience. In fact, a subset of a subset. The most angry reactionary members of the established fan base of the thing. So not just all Star Trek fans, not even just all really hardcore fanatical Trekkies, but the hardcore fanatical Trekkies who are the ones that if they see a Star Trek thing that they don't like or that they think doesn't qualify as real Star Trek to them, they will make a big deal about it online and they will raise hell about it and they will get all of their like-minded friends to raise hell about it too and trigger some kind of backlash against the thing. Those fans are the targets of these focus groups and wanting to make sure that, oh, whatever we do, we can't piss those people off. Hollywood thinking smaller and smaller and smaller is a problem, and that's what this kind of thing represents to me. Hollywood being so incredibly risk-averse, like to the point that they're petrified of alienating any part of the audience. They're petrified of anything happening ahead of the release of a movie to throw it in any kind of a bad light for anybody in the potential audience. They're so risk-averse. That's a problem as well, and that is also what this represents. But to me, the bigger problem with these kinds of superfan focus groups, not just using them, but also letting it get out there and letting it be public knowledge that studios are doing this and are concerned about pleasing or at least appeasing this particular segment of the audience. The biggest long-term problem with that is that it sends the message to those kinds of fans that their opinions matter to the people who make the movies and the TV shows, or that their opinions should matter to the people who make the movies and the TV shows, that they deserve some degree of creative input into the new projects in the big franchises that they have been following all of these years. And to anyone who is of that group who might be watching this video, to anybody watching this video who thinks that because you are a longtime fan of Star Wars, Star Trek, Marvel Comics, DC Comics, whatever, Ghostbusters, like whatever the thing is that you consider yourself a long-term hardcore fan of, if you think that entitles you to have a voice in the creation of the thing, to have some kind of input, to have a seat at the table with the people who are making the thing, if that's what you think you are entitled to, you're wrong. You don't deserve that. You're not entitled to that. The people who are making the new things in the thing you like are under no obligation to make sure that they're doing what you think they should do. Why are they under no obligation? To make sure that your sensibilities in particular are being served, or at least not offended? Well, part of it is that fans like you represent a tiny fraction of even the pre-existing dedicated fandom, let alone the general audience. But another really big reason is you don't know what the fuck you're talking about. Have you ever talked to a super fan of something about what would they like to see in the new season of their favorite show or the next movie in their favorite series or whatever? Have you ever talked to somebody like that and asked their opinion and asked what they would like to see? And I'm directing this question at everybody now. I'm no longer talking specifically to the toxic reactionary fans who may have somehow wandered in and are watching this video. I'm talking to everybody. And I'm not just referring to those really toxic reactionary superfans when I say, have you ever talked to a superfan about what they would like? Any kind of superfan. Not just like the hateful reactionary Trekkies, but anyone who is like a hardcore Trekkie who just loves Star Trek and lives and breathes and bleeds Star Trek. Or Star Wars, or Superman, or Batman, or the Avengers, or Lord of the Rings, or Harry Potter, or whatever their thing is. Have you ever asked one of those kinds of fans what they would like to see next? It's always the most boring, obvious, derivative, repetitive stuff. It's legacy-driven. It's focused on characters we've already met, usually doing things we've already seen. It's all about revisiting stuff. Let's flesh out this backstory that was mentioned in one episode. Let's see what's going on with this alien race that we haven't seen on screen for a few years. Let's learn about this character and what they were like when they were a teenager, or let's see what this character that we haven't seen in 40 years is up to now, or let's do a follow-up to my favorite episode, or let's do a series about my favorite character from one of the video games. I think that deserves a 10 or 12 or 15 episode streaming series. It's the most boring possible stuff. And I don't say that to insult fans who give those kinds of answers. It's just that they're not writers. They're fans. And of course, if you ask a fan of something, what would you like to see more of from the thing you like? They're going to say, well, give me more of what I've already seen that I know I like. It's an understandable response, but it's not the response you want to be guiding the creative decisions of the people who are making new stuff in the series. You want writers making those decisions, not fans. Now, some writers are also fans, but the good writers who are also fans are able to put their fandom in the back seat and focus on the job of being a writer or a director or an actor or a storyteller of some kind. The really good ones who are doing something in a franchise that they are also a fan of know how to separate that. And that's one of the reasons why fans, as a rule, tend to make bad writers or bad storytellers when it comes to telling stories in the milieu of the thing they love, because they're too close to it. They can't separate themselves from it. There's no distance. There's no perspective. They are unwilling or unable to take a story-first approach and to be creative and to be imaginative. They are, whether they realize it or not, whether they would describe it this way or not, they are penned in by their knowledge of the thing. They are shackled by the canon of, or what they think of as the canon. I think that's kind of a silly concept as well, but what they think of as the canon of Star Trek or Star Wars or whatever the thing is. They can't break loose of that and do what any writer needs to be able to do and use their imagination and think about ways they can add to this universe and tell a compelling story that is compelling in its own right for the story it's telling, for its plot, for its characters, for its themes, for its message, whatever it may have. They can't or won't do that. And that's why fans tend to be, I'm sure people can think of exceptions. Although if the exception you're thinking of is Terry Matalas, we're really going to disagree on that. But I'm sure fans can think of exceptions. But as a rule, I think fans, especially really hardcore super fans, make poor writers for the thing that they're fans of. But, fans not being writers is not the only problem or even the main problem with consulting fans, especially like dedicated hardcore super fans about creative decisions or taking focus groups to make sure that you haven't pissed them off. Most people aren't writers, not just fans of a thing. Most people aren't writers and aren't used to thinking in that writing mindset. A bigger problem to me is fans don't know what they want until they see it. And a lot of people have said that. If you're a Star Trek fan like me, you probably know that Nicholas Meyer has said that. Nicholas Meyer, of course, the director of Star Trek II, the co-writer of Star Trek IV, the co-writer and director of Star Trek VI. He's not a Trekkie, but he has made some of the best of all the Star Trek movies. And he has said that in interviews and at events repeatedly. Fans don't know what they want until you show it to them. Ira Steven Behr, who was the showrunner for Deep Space Nine for its final few seasons, has said the same thing. Fans don't know what they want until you show it to them. Nobody wanted Jaws until they saw Jaws. There was no clamor for Jaws until people saw it. Nobody wanted Star Wars until they saw Star Wars. Nobody knew that Star Wars could exist until they saw Star Wars, until a writer and a director, in this case the same person, made it up. Nobody wanted Indiana Jones until they saw it. Nobody wanted Superman until Action Comics #1 hit the newsstands in 1938. Sometimes you need to wait for a creative person, for a writer, a director, an artist of some kind to make the thing up. And then it's introduced to the audience, and then they realize this is what I've been waiting for all along. I didn't know it because it didn't exist. But now that I've seen it, that's my thing. That's how this works. So you can't consult fans, and it works just the same in pre-existing franchises as it does with stuff that never existed before, right? Star Wars. Yeah, Star Wars never existed before George Lucas made it, right? And now that Star Wars is a big thing, a big franchise with movies and TV series and comics and books and video games and live action and animation and all this stuff, now there's like this expectation in the minds of a lot of the fans of Star Wars of what it should be and how it should feel and, you know, what a proper Star Wars thing consists of. But the rules are the same. You won't know whether or not the next new Star Wars thing is what you wanted until it exists and you've seen it. And you might like it and you might not. But you need to wait for the creators to create it. You as a fan are probably not in the right mindset or having the right perspective to be able to envision what the next great Star Wars thing is going to be. And if for some reason you as a studio head or as a producer did want to take the expectations or the taste or the whatever of these kinds of superfans into account, or to take steps to make sure that you don't alienate them or you don't piss them off or whatever, these toxic online reactionary superfans are the worst ones you could possibly consult or whose sensibilities you could ever consider. Not just because they're reactionary assholes and they're impossible to please, but because their perspectives are so limited. These kinds of fans especially. It's not just the toxic fans that do that. Everybody online is susceptible to this. But these toxic reactionary fans in particular, they silo themselves off with other like-minded people. They exist in these bubbles where everybody who talks about Star Wars, for instance, talks about it in the same way that they talk about it. Still to this day, I will sometimes get comments from people on videos or replies on Twitter or whatever from people who just don't believe me when I say I think The Last Jedi is genuinely a great movie. They are so unaccustomed to hearing an opinion that is outside the norm of what they have heard in their reactionary rage bubble, that when they hear someone who exists outside that bubble say, actually, I think The Last Jedi is a really good movie. I think it's one of the best Star Wars movies. They either assume that I'm some doofus who just doesn't know what I'm talking about and I've never seen a movie before, or I've never seen a Star Wars movie before, or they assume that I'm kidding. I must be trolling. I must be being ironic because it's not possible that anybody really likes The Last Jedi, right? The Last Jedi is the second highest grossing Star Wars movie ever made. The only Star Wars movie that made more money at the box office is The Force Awakens, which a lot of these same fans also don't like. They don't hate it nearly as much as they hate The Last Jedi, but a lot of them don't like it either. It's the second highest grossing Star Wars movie ever. It has a 91% on Rotten Tomatoes. It received glowing reviews, or at the very least positive reviews, from most movie critics. In other words, this movie that they all hate, and they assume that everybody hates, and that the studio regards as a major mistake and an embarrassment that they would love to take back, is actually, in reality, an incredibly popular and critically acclaimed film. But these kinds of fans, these toxic reactionary fans, living in this bubble would never know that. Because they get all of their info and opinions about movies and TV shows from angry grifters on YouTube who have made entire careers out of constantly telling you why everything sucks. And the question that I always ask when this topic comes up is it really necessary for Hollywood movie studios to respond to these kinds of fans, or to take the interests or the opinions or the sensibilities of these kinds of fans into account at all? This is also from that Variety article. This is actually from a bit earlier in the article than that passage I read previously. Quote, "Perhaps the greatest irony of this phenomenon is the disproportionate impact these toxic fandoms have relative to their actual number. The vast majority of any fandom are casual fans," says John Van Citters, VP of Star Trek brand development, who has been with the storied franchise since the 1990s. The number of people who live and die on their franchises are very, very few. And then those who come after things that they espouse to love with venom are a really, really tiny subset of that already smaller subset of fandom. It's just much easier to see it now. I don't know that it's really that much broader than where things were in 1995. It's just that the bullhorn wasn't there. For some, combating that bullhorn amounts to acting as if they can't hear it. Particularly when it's a negative, toxic conversation, we don't even engage, says a TV marketing executive. Like with toxic people, you try to not give it too much oxygen. One principal concern is that reacting to these kinds of attacks risks alienating fans who are unhappy with creative choices about a franchise, but haven't tipped over into abusive behavior. So a studio may attempt to amplify friendlier voices instead. We'll reply to comments that are positive and elevate those things, says the TV exec. What's the best way to deal with toxic fans? Just ignore them. Don't convene a focus group to make sure that your newest whatever isn't going to piss them off. Just ignore them. Nothing good has ever come from studios pandering to pissy fans that was worth the damage caused by the pandering itself. And I know some of you are probably about to say, but what about the Sonic the Hedgehog movie? Yeah, what about it? If the studio hadn't changed the character design of Sonic at the last minute in response to an online fan backlash, my God, we might all today be living in a world where there was a Sonic the Hedgehog movie that fans of Sonic the Hedgehog didn't like. The horror. The horror. You know what I like? What I loved when I was a kid? What my whole fucking world revolved around when I was a little kid, when I would get home from school and sit down in front of the TV? He-Man. He-Man and the Masters of the Universe. I was as big a super fan of He-Man and the Masters of the Universe in the 80s as anybody. And then a few years ago, a Netflix series came out, a new He-Man animated series that was designed to kind of pick up where the original Filmation show left off, and it was executive produced and showrun by Kevin Smith, and I watched it, and it wasn't my thing. I didn't like it. I didn't think it was very good. I thought Mark Hamill was good as Skeletor, but that's about it. So you know what I did in response to that? I didn't watch any more of it. I watched the first season. I gave it a chance. Wasn't my thing. They've done, I think, a couple more seasons since, and I haven't watched it. Not my thing. I didn't even make like a video about it because I didn't have an opinion on it that I felt like was interesting enough to share with people. My opinion of it was, it's just not my cup of tea. I don't think it's very good. Hard to get a whole video out of that, isn't it? You know what else I love? Superman. You know what I really don't like? The DC Extended Universe version of Superman. The Zack Snyder, Henry Cavill Superman from Man of Steel and Batman v Superman and Justice League. I really don't think that's a very good version of that character. And I've said so on video repeatedly. I don't think they're good movies. I don't think it's a good incarnation of Superman. I've expressed that opinion. I still hold that opinion. You know what I didn't do? I didn't start an online petition. I didn't try to get anybody fired. I didn't try to have the movies removed from canon or remade or anything like that. I didn't try to ruin anybody's life. I didn't act like I was entitled to what I thought was a better Superman movie. I watched the movies, I didn't like them, I expressed my opinions about them and tried to do it in an articulate way without being a hater, without being an angry, bitter reactionary, without not liking it just because it didn't match my expectations. I tried to evaluate it as a critic would, as a film, as a series of films. And for the most part, unless somebody else brought it up or I saw a particular opportunity to express some new opinion on it or where my opinion on it would be relevant to some larger conversation, except for specific points like that, I got on with my fucking life like an adult. If you're an adult and you love Superman or you love Batman and you go see a movie and it's a Batman or a Superman movie, and you're sitting there in the theater watching it, and you think to yourself, oh man, this isn't very good. This is a shitty movie. You know what you do after that? Maybe if you have a blog or a podcast or a YouTube channel, you might express your negative opinion of it. You might give it a bad review and try to explain why you didn't like it, why it didn't work for you. But after that, you get on with your fucking life. When you buy a ticket to see a movie in a theater, or you rent a movie on demand, or you subscribe to a streaming service to watch a movie or a TV show or whatever it is, you are entering into a kind of a contract. But it's not the contract that these entitled, angry, reactionary superfans think it is. The contract is you paid your money and now you get to watch the thing you paid to see. That's it. You're not buying a guarantee that you're going to like it. You're not buying a guarantee that it's going to meet your expectations. You're not buying a guarantee that it's going to match the fucking fanfic that you've composed in your head or perhaps on your computer. You're not buying any of that. You're not guaranteed any of that. You're not entitled to any of that. That is not a reasonable expectation. You're allowed to not like it. I am as annoyed as anybody by toxically positive fans. I love really well-written, well-articulated negative reviews of things. If it's an intelligent, critical review, and it's not just hatred and bigotry, and there's too many queer people in it, and there's too many black people in it, and it's not exactly like I wanted it to be, and they did things that they didn't do in the comic, or they did things that they didn't do in the last movie, or this and that is different than it was before, and this contradicts that, and it ruined my immersion, and all these fucking horseshit crybaby complaints. If it's an intelligent negative review written by someone who's trying to give an intelligent review and express their opinion that they've clearly thought about, and it's a negative response to the thing, I'm all about that. I'm all for it. You ever read a really good negative review? You ever read Roger Ebert writing an absolutely savage review of a movie that he just thought was the shits? It's glorious. It's glorious. I'm all about that. And I can't stand toxically positive fans. I am incredibly irritated by these online fans who seem to have appointed themselves unpaid marketing people for the thing they love. They act as cheerleaders. Everything is great no matter what. All Star Trek is good Star Trek. All Star Wars is good Star Wars. Everything is great. We have to support everything uncritically and unreservedly. I don't get mad at those people because they're not actually doing any damage like the toxic, angry reactionaries are, but I do find them irritating. So I'm not saying that you have to like everything, but you're not entitled to like everything. You're not entitled to have everything that you like or everything that you have been a fan of meet your expectations and be exactly like you think it should be and to please you. That's not how this works. You're not going to like everything. Even if you're a Star Wars fan and you've been a Star Wars fan since you saw Star Wars in a theater in 1977 and you're an OG Star Wars fan, you don't own Star Wars. Your opinion of what makes Star Wars good is not the objectively correct opinion. There is no objectively correct opinion to what makes Star Wars good, or Star Trek good, or comic books good, or anything. It's all a matter of taste. It's all subjective. And your subjective opinion is not worth more than anybody else's. No matter how much longer you've been a fan than they have, no matter how much more intelligent you think your takes are than theirs, and you're not entitled to have the people who are making it please you. And a lot of the negative reactions that you see that drive these toxic segments of the fandom seem rooted in that sense of entitlement. It's not just that they didn't like the movie or the show. It's not just that they thought it didn't work for them on whatever level. It's that it didn't meet their expectations. They think, in their vanity and their fucking cluelessness, that they could have done a better job. And they are offended that they were not consulted. And apparently there are at least some people in Hollywood who think the best way to respond to those kinds of fans is to make more of an effort to consult them. I disagree. Those kinds of fans, they're loud, but they're small in number. They don't matter, or at least they shouldn't matter. And the sooner Hollywood realizes this, and stops listening to petulant, entitled, short-sighted, tedious, lore-pilled reactionaries, the better it will be for everyone. Except, of course, the aforementioned petulant, entitled, short-sighted, tedious, lore-pilled reactionaries. But as I believe I indicated previously, nobody should give a shit what they think anyway.